Hello, I'm David Haddock, lead writer and of Star Citizen, and welcome to another episode of Lore Maker's Guide to the Galaxy, where we, the lore team, examine one of the many systems that you will find in the Star Citizen universe and give you some detailed info about the system itself, some fun fictional facts, as well as some behind-the-scenes insight into the thought process behind the conception of the system. So let's get started. We're going to head to our super pretty and award-winning, congratulations everyone, star map. So here we are on Earth right now. So we'll zoom out. So go out to our bathroom, and today we are going to go to Cathcart. That's right, the infamous outlaw, even though it's technically unclaimed, system. So this was actually one of our oldest systems. Let's bring it up real quick. How was that for? Okay. All right. So we'll start high level and get you a bit of a just kind of see where it lies in the grand scheme of things. So this is Cathcart right here. You can see it's sort of on the western or eastern side of the known universe. Terra's over here. Earth is there, so it's pretty close. So again, this was actually one of our oldest systems, not in the game sense, but in sort of the project development one. During the initial crowdfunding campaign, we had a point where we generated basically 10 systems to help push us from $3 million to $4 million. And the idea being that each one was going to be unlocked at each 100,000 mark. So Cathcart was one of them. I had written up the initial blurb for the 10 systems, sent them to Chris, and then Ben created a post around them, and Forrest worked up a picture for us to use. So I thought it would be kind of fun, trip down memory lane. Here's the original description, dredged up from a Word document from November 6, 2012. Cathcart system, pirate system, galactic junkyard. One sun, there is there for light and a massive garbage disposal. It's literally a dumping ground on the side of a highway. The only official rule is that the route between jump points has to be clear at all times. Although it still falls under UE jurisdiction, it's become a conveniently located meeting spot for pirates and smugglers. No planets, natural ones anyhow. Squatters lashed together wreckage of massive ships, orbital platforms, and whatever happened to be drifting around, pressurized them and created man-made planets. Most visitors tend to keep their suits on during their stay, as it's not unusual for the shoddy construction to give out and lose pressure. So that was the original pitch for the system, and I mean, since then we've stayed pretty close to it. But we'll get into that in a little bit, but let's just dive right into the fiction of the system, and I'll throw in whatever weird rambling insights I can. So again, Cathcart system here. Was appropriately enough, the system was officially discovered in 2438 by a wanted fugitive named Adelaide Loris. There had been speculation, basically, that Loris might have been using the system as like a private hideout and might have gotten nervous when she saw explorers scanning for jump points nearby and decided to cash in rather than risk one of them discovering it. So, in an ironic turn, she named the system after Winton Cathcart, who was a marshal at the time, who was effectively her nemesis sort of in law enforcement, the Al Pacino to her Robert De Niro, if we're going to go with the Heat metaphor. But anyway, her newfound wealth didn't last long, and Loris would end up returning to a life of crime, and in another twist of irony, Cathcart was the one who shot her in 2464. So yeah. Anyway, system itself, as you can see, is, let me go to 3D, is pretty empty. You have at the center a, big, basically it's a dwarf star, I think it's a type A, which is apparently gives off like a bluish white color. But yeah, pretty much the place is dead. There are no planets to speak of. There's just basically a very large asteroid belt that encircles it. And so needless to say, at the time it was passed off to the UNE. They were not tremendously impressed. So actually, this is kind of a fun turn of events. Let's see if we can go wider here. You can see that basically it was discovered from Davian system, and the idea was that after the discovery of Cathcart, it basically caused a bunch of people to flood into the system in 2438 to start looking for other jump points, because it's that sort of thing where it's like, oh, you found one, maybe there's more around. And so one of those kind of wannabe explorers turned out to be a guy named Vernon Tarr, who ended up shooting at a passing ship because he was afraid that they were going to try and start scanning in their area, and that passing ship turned out to be a Banu, so he inadvertently discovered or made first contact with an alien species, and so that was sort of in the wake of the Cathcart. So anyway, getting back to Cathcart. Since there weren't any planets in Cathcart, the UNE didn't really know what to do with it, so they sort of toyed with the idea of making this like a location of like deep space comm experiments and stuff like that, but nothing ever came to fruition, and they ultimately scrapped it. So the government started using the system as a junkyard, basically kind of breaking down ships and storing them here because they could just kind of do it and, you know, leave it, and if they wanted to come back to the stuff, they could. If they wanted to just throw it in the sun, they could. There were no local residents to annoy with trash. So over the years, basically, as kind of surrounding systems were discovered, Cathcart became more of a throughway and junkyard. The UNE and then what became the UPE never officially claimed the system because there wasn't really anything to claim. But in the meantime, in sort of the depths of the piles of trash and stuff like that, some interesting things were happening. Far away from the traveled shipping lanes, industrial squatters began to lash together abandoned pieces and repressurizing them and creating basically like improvised space stations. And one in particular began to expand sort of over the years and became known as sort of the pirate city known as Spider. And the origin of the name was I think it was kicked around in an early design art meeting, but there was this sort of idea that it would be this sort of have this kind of web-like appearance of all of these different pieces of ships kind of lashed together and stuff. So I don't know if that aesthetic is going to stick anymore, but that was sort of the idea at the time. But basically Spider has become sort of like the biggest, most concentrated haven of outlaws sort of in the known universe, their capital, if you want to call it that. And we'd also toyed with the idea originally of having multiple landing zones, so you could kind of, land in different sections of it, and each of them would be controlled by a different gang who would have their own kind of set of rules. And again, I don't know if we're going to still be able to run with that idea, but it was sort of fun that you would have to, landing in one section, you could do things that you couldn't do in another and stuff like that. But anyway, and actually, if you want to get sort of a taste of the flavor of it, in the opening chapter of the Lost Generation serial story, Tanya's buying a Tavaran Codex on Spider. But anyway, the overall idea was just to have it be that sort of dank, gritty, cyberpunky style space station with kind of crazy gangs, hive of villainy, et cetera, et cetera. But basically a place with the potential for a bunch of fun stories and characters. And apparently good waffles if you talk to King Shadow. But from a practical standpoint, we needed basically a major landing zone that would accommodate sort of the criminal characters. We'd have Earth, we'd had Terra, and we just needed sort of a third part to throw in there. And the actual inspiration behind the idea of it was inspired by the raft in the end of Snow Crash. If you've read that, if you haven't, go read it. Basically, there was this massive flotilla of ships and oil tankers and boats that's slowly making its way across the ocean. And it was a really just great visual and a book of great visuals. So it was just, but it did obviously create a lot of migraines in the dev team thinking about how we were going to possibly build something like this. But anyway, getting back to the history, so Cathcart pretty much is sort of, that was sort of its flavor, and it stayed that way for quite some time. But something started to change probably in the 30th century. We'll go back to the star map just to kind of illustrate this. But again, sort of seeing where it's situated, you have basically Cathcart here, Hades here, Nexus, which for a really long time was basically an unclaimed system, Min, and then Tyrannus. And so with this sort of cluster, actually less so than Tyrannus, but with this sort of cluster here, you had a pretty high concentration of unclaimed systems, and all of them were basically attracting a lot of people. Like, they've become pretty settled, and particularly during the Messer era, when people were trying to get away from the sort of really oppressive UAE government. I mean, not that there are many people probably living in Hades, just because it's sort of that dead, ancient civilization, civil war-torn planet, destroyed planet thing. But even so, you still had like this sort of mass of unclaimed systems in the middle here. And but anyway, rumors started to spread basically that there was talk about kind of uniting all of these systems together to form sort of what we would equate to sort of an independent country type thing. So it'd be independent of the UAE and be its own type of government. So in 29, I believe it was 31, Dean Keller went on this infamous thing called Keller's Run, where he picked a fight in Cathcart and started this sort of sprawling system-to-system chase that just looped in a bunch of criminals and bounty hunters and pirates and eventually law enforcement. And when the cops kind of started to jump in, they realized how little control that they could exert in this area. And so many people believe that, as you can see here, that Nexus is now a claimed UAE system, that the reason why the UAE decided to reclaim the system and kick all the criminals out was kind of to not only establish some law and order in that area, but was also potentially to break up the bid of this sort of area of space from becoming sort of an outlaw government is probably not accurate, but you know what I mean. So anyway, needless to say, a lot of people in Nexus system didn't take too kindly to being kicked out of their homes, so they started to basically fight with the UAE in there. So the UAE simply held their ground and did their best to fend off the attacks, but in 2935, there was this thing called the Walser Massacre, which was at OP Station Damien, which you will see in Star Marine, which basically a bunch of outlaws came in and just murdered a lot of people, and the government and the authorities basically, the authorities kicked the hornet, or the outlaws basically kicked the hornet's nest, if you will. So in response, the military, convinced that the supporters of the attack were congregating in Cathcart, launched basically an intensive bombing campaign to try and decimate a lot of the inhabitants. So it was sort of not the message that this progressive UAE was really wanting to send, but they attacked Spider in the sort of auspices of suppressing these violent insurgents. But due to the vast amount of trash and debris in the system, Navy ships weren't able to get close enough to effectively destroy Spider or make much of a dent overall, but they still, hurt some people. And all it did ultimately was just kind of piss everybody off even more. So that's basically where we're at now. That was the massacre was in 2935, so it's sort of, the sort of wake of that is still relatively fresh. But yeah, so that's pretty much Cathcart as it stands. And again, obviously, this team hasn't started to look at this system yet. So, while this web-like network of lashed together capital ships sounds really sweet, long story short, cool pirate system, awesome man-made pirate base thing, and not a lot of law. Anyway, so that is Cathcart in a nutshell. But thank you for watching. If you haven't, you should obviously, if you haven't dug into the star map, I really, really recommend it. It is amazingly beautiful and full of really, really cool little tidbits about the sort of the system at large for Star Citizen and where you guys will ultimately get to wander around. I'd like to thank you to subscribers for helping us make shows like this and ATV and Bug Smashers possible. And a big thanks to all of the backers in general, because you're the reason that we're here at all. So I'm Dave Haddock. This is Lore Maker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in the Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.